What up, pipsqueaks? That's right, today we are hopping on the bandwagon, talking about a new 2025 film. Which film are you asking? Did you not look at the fucking thumbnail? Did you just go into this video blind? Did it just pop up on your next recommended? Were you watching a mukbang of someone eating chili tacos and then this one popped up? That would be weird because I don't do that type of stuff. Anyhow, sorry for that little tangent. We're talking about Zach Cregger's motherfucking Weapons. Zach Cregger is an up-and-coming horror director along the lines of Jordan Peele, where he transitioned from comedy into horror. He has one of my favorite comedies of all time, Miss March. Miss February on my day. And I'm gonna say his first movie back in 2022, Barbarian, really exceeded my expectations, so I went into this one without watching the trailer, and let's just say it was captivating at best. So if you want to bick back and talk about this new movie, I'm hopping on the bandwagon and talking about modern day shit because we do nostalgia here, but today we switching it up. If that sounds fun to you, come hang out with me. What up, y'all? Welcome back to Phantom of the Indie Review. I am your host. Modern baseball deal. I only know one song by that band. We are on the journey of 5,000 subscribers, and guess what? Are we gonna get there? Probably not. Would it be nice and ideal and fun to get there? Absolutely, I would adore that with my whole heart. But let me be real with you. Why do YouTubers always have to be like, please like and subscribe? Is the fan base I already have not enough? No, there are more than enough. But you know, I wouldn't be doing my side job if I wasn't trying to promote this shit. So you gotta understand, like, bear with me. If you like horror, comedy, vibing off with the homeboy, this is a perfect place for you because all we do is talk strictly this type of content, scary stuff. And if any of that sounds interesting to you, come hang out with me. Give me a shabby. Weapons is a movie that, coming from the horse's mouth, the director Zach Cregger himself, is an interpretation of grief. Oftentimes with horror, I feel like that is quite abundantly the clear cause of trauma and regret in horror because everyone has to deal with grief, loss. It's personal, but yet impacts the community. And a little side note, Zach Cregger, creator of sketch comedy The Whitest Kids You Know, was best friends with his homie for life, Trevor Moore, who tragically passed away in 2021. That is a friendship that they had lifelong, and that's something that nobody should ever have to go through. And he decided to start writing this movie to cope and process with the loss of his friend, and that is how you can see in every shot, every visual, every captured dialogue that this movie is quite abundantly a tribute to mourning and grieving and letting go. It also has side notes about a character in specific where Zach Cregger grew up very neglected, abused, and kind of taken and pretty much raised himself as a child, and there are characters that pretty much embody the recollection of his tormented past. In this movie, which I love when directors do, it's pretty much a love letter to their insecurities and trauma at heart, and they display it on the screen because that's such a vulnerable thing. At the end of the day, people can watch this movie and be like, I didn't get it, it wasn't that good, but these people take their heart and souls and they put it on the line. Now let's talk about it. What exactly is Weapons about? This movie centers around a small town. One night out of nowhere, a bunch of kids just up and go missing. And I will start off by saying right off the rip, I really like the introductionary narrative of it because it comes across as a little child spilling the tea, essentially. Like, this is our town. One night, a bunch of kids walked out of their house and were never seen again. The cops tried to look for them. It's not all over the news because no one could solve the case. And I feel like the way he managed and decided to write specifically how the kid relayed the information, it was a little bit chaotic, because if you heard the story off the rip from anyone, like a grown-up, you'd be like, that's a weird story. But to have a kid deliver it and then also say it in a mannerism where they're not quite fully sure too, like, you know, kids speak a certain way, it was full of like kind of like loose ends and plot holes because it's a kid communicating from their perspective. My only downfall is that I don't quite understand who that kid was. They're not really referenced later in the film, but this movie focuses on that town where everybody from one classroom except for one kid named Alex just goes missing one night, and the teacher is getting the backlash from the community about it. And it has a very deep social commentary on people trying to find a closure, resolution, to pinpoint the problem, and this teacher has happened to get all the backlash aimed at her. And it's a very jarring performance from the teacher's end, where she is really grieving because she wants all these answers, where she is trying to find closure within herself because she's like, all my students went missing and apparently everyone thinks I'm the one to fault. So it becomes kind of like quite literally a societal witch hunt. They write witch on her car, they target her, they threaten her, she has to be escorted out of school, and all this stuff is going around where she just feels so alone and cornered, and like she starts to get paranoid and judgmental to the point where she sees one of her exes and he's like, you're thinking too much on it. Because sometimes when you go through stuff, people do have that perception and bad habit to ingrain stuff into their head where they do feel like the victim, they do feel targeted. And in this case, even though she is, the friend's not quite picking up, he's not being sympathetic, he's like, you're just misreading it. And the best part about this movie is that it is partitioned off into 4-5 chapters of all the main characters, and it follows the lineage, a timeline of the night of the first meeting where the teacher is getting the backlash, all the way leading up until a final reveal where each individual character, they get their very own chunk of the story told. And it's cool because there are some times where it cross blends into the scenes of the opposite perspective. So when he goes into the bar to see her, we get his perspective, but earlier on in the film when she is waiting for her friend to come, he comes in and she sees it from her perspective. And the only little flaw I have with that is they could have cut a good chunk of the film out, because after the second little vignette, it's quite apparent that it's all happening in the same time frame. We get the snippet of everything adding up and being in the same exact moment. So I feel like he did use a lot of filler of showing scenes from a different perspective that could have added to more runtime of telling the backstory of this intricate lore, because this is a very intricate, deep-rooted movie at heart. Essentially, while this metaphorical witch hunt is going on towards the teacher and all these kids are missing, it's telling a real life story in between where there was halfway through the movie where at one point I was like, I don't even know if this movie is what I thought it was. Like, cause it's like a real life situation scenario being unfolding from each perspective. And it's not like one of those movies where every little thing is convenient to the plot, every little thing is scary, every little thing pertains to the main issue of these kids being missing. And where are they? I feel like it's a day in the life of all this crazy stuff unfolding, where there are moments where you're like, what does this have to do with the movie? And it unfolds perfectly. And I feel like every character really holds their weight, from the teacher to the grieving dad who's looking for a son that you feel the most pain for and heart tugging, emotions for. There's a cop, there's this one tweaker dude, phenomenal job. Like, I'm gonna say this, like, we all know that fucking tweaker in town that is kind of quite apparently like not a piece of shit, but they're just like shady, belligerent, off kilter. And the actor Austin Abrams, I believe, who plays this character, nailed it on the head. Like, I saw this dude on the screen and I was like, this reminds me of about 10 different people I know. And it was funny. That's where I like with horror when comedians take over, because horror is funny, it's just how you depict it and how you change the tone. Horror is comedy but with different music, but I feel like a lot of horror writers couldn't write a comedy, and it takes a lot of ingenuity and versatility to pull that off. But at the stem of it, this movie keeps you guessing every turn. I'm pretty good at picking apart scripts, but for me, right off the rip, I was kind of stumped. I was like, I don't know where this movie is going, and it was captivating, and every character mattered. Every thing, when you look back in hindsight, tied together perfectly. So the teacher, she is selfishly trying to solve the case, not because of the kids themselves, but like the principal of the school says, he's like, that's the biggest problem. You only care about how you feel, you care about your closure, you care about your grief, but it's not about you. The principal, he has his hands tied because everyone wants this teacher fired, but he's looking out for her. The one dad throughout the movie is kind of stalking her and being like, I really don't trust this girl, and then they end up working together. And all around, it is a pretty provocative movie until it gets to the point of the perspective of the one little kid that survived, where it flips the whole thing on its head, and it's quite great. So from here on out, I'm going to get into some spoiler talk. I didn't want to spoil the whole movie because I really feel like this genuinely is one of those movies along the line where you want to go into it with very little expectations because it just works better. But essentially, all these kids that go missing from their homes, put under a spell by the main kid, Alex's aunt, who is pretty much a witch at heart, some sort of witchcraft. I'm not saying she's an entity, a creature, a monster. It's more spiritual and realistic, but all these kids are took to her because she is dying, and she is essentially, what I was getting from it is feeding off their youth to a point where she comes to town and goes after Alex's parents, and she's like, that's not enough energy for me, I need more. So she gets all these kids under her spell. Alex is just there to pick up the pieces, and that again ties together to Zach Cregger's growing up of like, he has to take care of like his zombified parents and like be vigilant and act like everything's fine. And for a kid to bear that weight is very heavy. It's very scary. It's not a scary movie where it's a horror, but it's a psychological thriller. It pulls at your heartstrings, again with the character of the dad who's looking for a son. He's kind of losing it. He keeps fucking up at work. He keeps doing all this crazy stuff that's like getting him in trouble. He's snapping at people, and you really feel for it, because what would you do in that situation? And the thing I like is that all the characters in this movie like understand that. Like this one scene, the principal's like, I couldn't imagine losing a kid. I'm so sorry you're going through that. And like, that's nice to hear someone say that, because oftentimes I feel like people, if they're not dealing with something directly, they don't know how to cope with it. But all these characters blend flawlessly together, and it unravels a mysterious story that it does get a little bit outlandish and chaotic, but it's also really fun. Like, for example, the aunt, she's this eccentric, quirky, eerie, funny fucking character, but with an evil, malicious heart. She does this one thing right off the rip where she's like, Alex, if you do anything to disservice me, this is what's gonna happen. She has a spell over the family, and she makes them start fucking stabbing their faces with a fork. She's like, so if you say anything at school about anything, this is your life now. And they're like, damn, that is brutal. And like, you're really worried because all these kids are missing, Alex is going through it, and it just really paints a picture of some sort of, not quite demonic, but some sort of evil presence taking over this town in a really realistic way. It wasn't supernatural, it wasn't a monster. Like, if witchcraft and all that stuff is real, she honed the craft and the magic behind it, and that is really real world and creepy within itself. There is one scene where I picked up on this early on. It was very metaphorical and referencing to a parasitic entity as well, because when first they get into the classroom, on the backboard, you just see today's lessons, parasites, and then later on in the movie, there's a scene where the principal and his lover are at home, and it references a parasitic creature on the TV, and then I feel like I couldn't help but connect those two dots, and that not only is she a witch, but it's some sort of parasitic creature feeding off the community, and grief itself is parasitic. There's one tribute to Trevor Moore in the movie where the principal's hanging out with his lover, and they sit down and he has a plate of 7 hot dogs, and that references a very infamous skit from The Whitest Kids You Know. And I feel like not only that is that a little homage to his best friend, but it's also like hitting home the fact that yes, he is grieving, and this movie is about loss and grief, and all together it's just tied around beautifully. This video sounds like it's all over the place. It's because I still don't even want to do a full spoiler, even though I'm telling you a lot. It's just one of those movies that you have to see for yourself. It's one of those rare movies where it is kind of indistinguishable. You pick it apart and you have your own interpretation, but it's not quite ambiguous as much as it is like well crafted. Like, no stones are unturned, there's answers to everything, and then where there's not, there are some answers that are okay. So from this creepy aunt essentially controlling the kids and some people in town with her voodoo, to Alex trying to, get his parents back, to the teacher essentially trying to figure out her grief, the parent trying to find his son, it wraps up beautifully. Because at first I had to think about it, I was kind of annoyed because it kind of drops the teacher character in the last scene, but again, it was a selfish closure for her. She just wanted her own peace of mind, her own grief to be taken away from her. So the fact that they do find all these kids at the end ends her story, and that the dad does get to find his kid, and that Alex, and sometimes it doesn't tie together beautifully, where they say at one point Alex's parents are now being taken care of in another facility and he lives somewhere else. So it's like not everything does have a happy ending. And I will say that the ending of this movie does have a brutal, funny, outlandish kill scene as well. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have you seen this movie? Comment down below. Let me know. Please subscribe. Give me a thumb or hit that ding-a-ling button resting telling you, hey, it's me, I'm here. And I'm gonna say it 1 time for the 1 time and 2 times for the O. It's gonna be a hell yeah for horror. But then they're like, yo, he's coming out with a movie called X, and it was one that like you watch the trailer and you're like, ooh, a slasher, kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired with the filmography